Hey, and welcome to the Change Leaders Playbook, bringing you all things delivery and leadership in a podcast. Now, have you ever experienced a major change in your organization? Or have you even been part of a team delivering programs that span people, processes, and technology change? Now, these types of initiatives can be complex, emotional, and drawn out. My guest today, Mike Dimitriadis, shares his extensive experience in this area, which I'm sure will give us all a lot to think about and apply. Now, Mike has over 20 years experience leading cross-functional technology programs and product delivery in high-growth product-led organizations. He specialises in bridging engineering, product and operations to deliver complex business-critical platforms and scalability across multiple frameworks. And it's my pleasure to welcome Mike. Mike, how are you? How's it going?
Okay. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for the intro. That was really cool. Very nice. Couldn't have done it better myself.
So, Mike, it's good to catch up with you again. I'd like to say that we are friends. I'd like to say we're professional working colleagues and all the rest of it. And so it's really good to have you on because you're one of the people that I really value in terms of your experience, your influence, your exposure, and just your even your sense of humor. So I think it's great to have you on the podcast. Now, what I want to do first of all, if you wouldn't mind, I know I started an intro, but if you wouldn't mind introducing what got you really interested in a career in change, in delivery, and broader transformation. How did that pan out for you?
The thing that I've kind of become quite passionate about during my career has been around just creating that environment of sustainable innovation and high performance teams. To kind of empirically demonstrate measurable impact. And my career kind of started off in banking of all things, but it kind of then led to a move into Accenture, where I spent a lot of my time there, about 8 or 9 years, working across different retail and consumer good clients. And in that period, and during that time, delivering a lot of I became a specialist in Oracle retail and payment solutions. So a lot of my projects were around implementing ERP solutions in retail for Oracle solutions. And it was an amazing learning experience, how to implement large platforms, package solutions, how to navigate that change. One of the key learnings I had there was a lot of the organizations were looking to change the platform or upgrade their platform, but instead of changing to align with the package solution that they had purchased, they then ended up customizing it to the hilt to make it fit to how they operate, which then meant that it defeated the object of using a package solution because then you just go off the upgrade path. But that was an interesting insight into business change. This is where the business did not want to change, but they wanted the technology. And it just adds waste and cost into business change. I then had the opportunity to move into industry, and I joined Marks and Spencer's. I first joined their e-commerce business, the .com, working on a replatforming. They'll basically bring their e-commerce platform in-house and then productizing it and setting up product structure. And that was my first kind of experience into agile and product management. It was, I have to say, after quite a long time delivering package solutions, which is a very prescriptive process, the agile Kool-Aid wasn't very nice. I didn't like it at all. But after a time, I got to like it. I got to understand it. I got to drink more of it. I drink it every day. And there from .com, I looked after a digital stores portfolio of products, and that was great fun. A lot of innovation, R&D, being very close to the customers, to store colleagues. That I really enjoyed that. And then I moved into foods and looked after the portfolio of supply chain forecasting allocation systems. And again, it was applying agile practices and methods to deliver ongoing and delivering value. And that was good because it allowed us to start building. And the thing I really enjoyed was actually bring the business and engineering teams closer together so we can be more responsive and more collaborative. And for me, that was, again, the other reason why I enjoyed working in an agile practice, using agile practices. So from that, I kind of decided, you know what, I've only learned how or experienced it in one organization, and I'd really like to experience how this type of practice, this type of delivery, this type of business change happens in other organizations. And that's when I decided to go back into consultancy. And there I had the opportunity to work across various organizations, retail, finance, media, insurance, and playing various roles, head of delivery, product delivery lead, program manager, agile coaching, but all are centered around delivering business change, driving a culture of continuous improvement and improved throughput and value being delivered. So, and kind of like when you look at it at a kind of a micro level, each organization has their own nuance, their own specific kind of challenge that you need to overcome. But when you take a step back and look at the macro change, there are consistent themes. There are common themes across all of these challenges organizations are facing.
So that's quite diverse in terms of the types of roles you've had within the same sphere of change and delivery. What would you say is your sort of favourite type, your preferred type of role, whether it's program management, delivery head, or agile coach, or anything like that?
I prefer roles which are around like heads of delivery type of roles, because it's around building capability and helping remove systemic impediments, organizational systemic impediments of how to kind of help teams achieve their kind of missions as effective as possible. And having that ability and authority to start looking at how you can tweak the operating model, the way in which the teams are structured as well, to kind of address the current challenges that they're facing to those systemic impediments.
So I'm going to move on to transformation overall, right? So we've been in this situation. I've certainly experienced, I've been in the receiving end and have had to be involved in the delivery of changes that really transform the way a business or a business unit operates. And they can be very emotive. They can be quite challenging for all concerned. But I know that you've had involvement across the years in those sort of types of initiatives as well. What does that mean to you in terms of the importance of doing it right? Because the stakes are quite high in those sorts of initiatives, aren't they?
If you don't have a business strategy which is underpinning that transformational change, then it's why you're doing it. You lose the why, and you lose the kind of a mechanism to gain buy-in from the people that are being impacted. It's taken a while to kind of understand, and I came across something called the Kubler-Ross change curve, which when I saw it for the first time, it kind of all the kind of pieces of the puzzles just kind of came together. Now, people may be familiar with this because it's a kind of a grief curve, and but it has been applied to change as well. So still going through, when someone's when people are embarking on a change, they feel uncomfortable. They have that shock. They have the kind of the denial phase of that kind of change journey, and then there's a frustration about it, because it's things are going to be doing differently, and they don't know what it means for them. And then it goes into depression, which is kind of where it's a lack of energy, where it's kind of, damn, this is actually going to happen. But it's only when you get to that bottom bit piece, trough, and you're coming back the other end, is when you're really going to get that impact of change, where people are starting to kind of appreciate, adopt it, and kind of make it happen. Now, making change is not something that can be done overnight. You're creating new habits. You're making people feel uncomfortable because they're having to do things in a slightly different way, which they're not accustomed to. But yeah, the only way to kind of get you out of the other side of that kind of trough is the why. Why are we doing this, and how can we measure the impact of this change?
The other thing, as you mentioned, that I was definitely thinking and agreeing with you as well, was the why has to be brought in to by the people who are being impacted by it. There could be an amazingly compelling reason to do such changes where you're changing so many processes and technologies and ways of people operating. But if the people that are having to do it, or the people that it's impacting, are not bought into the reasons why, it's going to be a very painful experience for all concerned. And I think just to build on that, I think the why is absolutely mandatory, but also buy-in.
I've gone to clients and they've gone through these kind of failed attempts of change, and they kind of get to the bottom of the curve, of the Kubler-Ross curve, and then they stop. They never try and come out the other end because they run out. It takes too long. It's the kind of the confidence that they will come out the other end. For whatever reason, they never try and manage to get out the other end. And what happens, that creates this kind of behavior that actually, why should I change? Because we're never going to come out the other end. And it just, every time you do a failed attempt, it just kind of perpetuates the problem and makes the dip even deeper to go through in order to come out the other end. So that there needs to be a degree of patience and faith to get you to the other side of the other end of the change before you start seeing the benefits. It is difficult. And the larger the organisation, the longer it will take.
I've got a question for you, Mike. I know that there are significant amounts of failures that are undertaken and experienced by teams, by people who are impacted by transformative changes. You must have a long list of them that you've got. What would you say are top 3 or 4, where transformative changes have failed or been less successful than they otherwise would have done because of something that people should have done better on? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, an interesting stat for you actually is multiple studies have shown that only about 20 to 30% of transformations actually achieve their objective, which is really, really low. And it's about not getting to the other end of that kind of change curve, which I mentioned earlier. I think when I reflect back on some of the kind of the things that have gone successful and those that haven't, the main kind of learnings has been not enough investment in that change element. It is just as important as the actual technology or process changes you're implementing is the business change. Because again, going back to the point I made earlier, there's no point investing lots in the kind of the asset or the processes you're changing if they're not going to be adopted, because it's a sunk cost. So you need to really think hard and kind of invest in that adoption phase of change. Adoption is quite a broad statement when you think about it. It covers a lot of facets, the kind of the communications, the regularity, the clean language you use, the opportunity for people to have a voice and talk. There's kind of an ADKAR model which is a good framework to use when looking at how you want to engage and implement change. That's kind of around ensuring they've got the ability to implement the new skill, the awareness of why the change is needed, the desire for to participate, providing the knowledge of how to change. People think that people can just change. Sometimes you need to help people to kind of go on that journey and provide them techniques and so forth. And then kind of assuring abilities to implement new skills. So the training aspects, the kind of any learning pathways that need to be changed. And then there's the establishing the reinforcement of that change, because like I mentioned earlier, new habits take time to implement. So just doing it once doesn't necessarily guarantee adoption. It's that regular drumbeat of kind of drumming it into people, this new change. So you need to think about slightly longer term how to kind of get that stickiness of that change in.
What do you think about the need for all parts of the organisation to work together? It's often overlooked. Quite often, changes that happen to organisations are probably to address siloed ways of working. But then when they get implemented, they often are still implemented in a siloed fashion. So I wonder whether you've experienced that.
You're absolutely right. There are instances where change has commenced, but they haven't got the buy-in from all parties that are being impacted, and therefore it just becomes like pushing water uphill. Again, going back to, you need to have a business strategy, a strategy to kind of why the change is occurring. But then you need to, when you do implement the change, you need to think about the kind of Conway's law. So architecting the change to align with communications channels, and that will hopefully prevent that siloed way of working, or kind of the siloed teams. So yeah, that's an important factor that people forget. I give you some examples where I've seen organizations which are kind of coming out of the growth phase, a startup, and kind of scale up, and then they're kind of going into the stabilization phase, and they've started to align against the technology teams against platforms, but they got the business teams aligned to go to markets or channels, and then you have this kind of matrix structure which creates silos and makes communication between the teams, the business and the engineering teams or the product teams, very difficult and challenging from a prioritization perspective, and dependencies perspective. So it goes back to trying looking at, and a really good book I recommend people to read is Team Topology. It kind of gives you a way to describe and articulate and start thinking about how to visualize organizations and teams into different fundamental team types, and how different ways in which you can structure them to be kind of aligned with the business.
I'm very keen to understand. I know you mentioned earlier on at the beginning of the conversation, the why is important, having a clear strategy. Have you got any examples of maybe where not having a strategy has been evident and the impact it's had on a team?
Business strategies must come before the transformation, not the other way around. And that's where you start having initiatives without a clear strategy foundation, and it becomes difficult to kind of build on solid foundations. It's like building a house without a blueprint. Business strategy defines where you want to play and how you want to win, and the kind of how you're going to create value for the customers, how you're going to create value for your employees, how you're going to collaborate with any suppliers that you're working with, and generate value. And without that kind of strategy in place, transformations risk becoming a series of siloed improvements which don't contribute to an overarching why. It's that bridge that kind of sticks everything together.
When we started on projects, there was certain ways of doing things which were quite structured, quite rigid, which all for the right reasons, and tools that we had which were, again, useful. Things have evolved now, but the need to drive multiple teams simultaneously has never gone away and never will in a larger program. Have you got any ideas or suggestions of tools that will be really useful, or techniques that are really useful to actually get people on the same page, so that disparate teams or multiple teams working towards the why, the single why, can actually stay on the same page and organize themselves effectively?
I think it's, again, it goes down to designing the teams correctly. If you can create the correct kind of business domains and align the technology and the teams behind each domain, it prevents you from scaling vertically, having layers and layers of management to coordinate multiple teams. Where if you can scale horizontally, where you're creating business defined domains with the right skills and capabilities to kind of deliver the value stream there, you don't need so many layers to coordinate above that. And it's about structuring the organization in a way which simplifies, reduces dependencies, creates good communications channels from business to kind of releasing new features and operations, and that way you just reduce the number of kind of layers on top. In terms of kind of delivery frameworks, again, there are many scaling frameworks out there. The challenge I have with them, none of them think about the organizational org structure. It's very much doesn't consider at all. So whenever you apply these kind of frameworks, you need to tweak it in the context of the organizational hierarchy and line management structure. So you need to kind of feel your way a little bit into embedding the right framework for the right context. And in kind of tooling, the tool that will enable you to collect meaningful data, delivery data and insights. Now I'm kind of leaning more into business change, which requires a technology change here. And so if you are changing your product delivery function, for example, tools like Jira, Azure DevOps. I've spent most of my career using Jira, so I'm more comfortable with that tool in terms of setting up teams, governance, reporting, because it allows you to, if you kind of really map the workflows to how teams operate, and you've got a good low dependency, fairly flat organizational delivery structure, you can get some really good data out about team performance. And then you're starting to think about delivery data, delivery data-led decisions and continuous improvements. And it gets you into that mindset. And then you start applying that mindset to the kind of the business change aspect. So what data points are we generating from the change we're implementing to know we're getting the right adoption rate? And there are so many tools out there, from Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, SurveyMonkey. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which you can start now collecting data on how well the business change has been adopted. Again, it just depends on the type of change and the scale. If you don't know what you're measuring, then how do you know you're succeeding? And if you can't measure what you're trying to measure, again, how do you know you're succeeding? It's really important that you understand, again, going back to your business strategy, the outcome you want to achieve, how you're going to measure the outcomes, and then work through how at the very early stages of the change, how you're going to track, visualize, and gain insights from that data. Doing it later on, halfway through delivery or halfway through the implementation of change is way too late. And it helps you with the storytelling as well. If you've got the data from early doors, it just helps with the storytelling and the impact that you're having with implementing this change. Because if you're thinking from a return on investment side, you want to make sure you're gaining the most value as early as possible to make an informed decision whether when are we ready to finish, when can we stop. So again, you need the data.
Feel free and far away.
Have you been on a change program which has been successful, and what was it that made it successful?
I have been on actually a few that have been successful, and it was quite clear to me actually why they were successful, and it was about probably three things, maybe more. One was clear sponsorship, and I mean active sponsorship. So somebody at the top owned that program and delegated to a senior enough person that could actually make things happen. So whilst you have a very senior person who owned the initiative and put their name on it, they probably weren't going to do all the work, but they were going to be in all the right meetings to make sure that everyone's every door that needed to be opened was opened. And then they had somebody suitably empowered and experienced to drive it from a day-to-day sponsorship perspective. And that meant that they had the credibility across their peers and within the organization to actually get things done, and they had respect from people. So clear active sponsorship and where delegated to somebody who had a day-to-day sponsorship, what that means is that person already had credibility, built-in credibility, and acted on it, and you leveraged it to their example, to their advantage. So that has to happen, and that was one of the key success areas, really. The other one then was storytelling, being able to tell the story. And one of the things that spring to my mind was a program which was very emotive, quite significant changes to people. However, it was they were brought in on the journey. They fed into the shaping of what the change looked like to a degree. They couldn't influence everything, and they were communicated very frequently and in multiple different channels, which meant that people that preferred audio were given that audio update, people that preferred emails, people that preferred face-to-face, all the rest of it. Different channels of communication were utilized frequently. And I recall this as well because I was asked for lots of information as the program manager for metrics around how we're doing. So I would say those three things were really important: active sponsorship, communication that was clear and diverse and regular, sometimes over communication, which was two-way, and then tracking. So it could be that there were other things, but those are the areas where I've found focusing on those three things have made transformative changes more successful by far than they otherwise would have been. Yeah,
it's not technology that's the problem. It's the human element that we need to kind of embrace and focus in on. And I think we focus too much on the technology side rather than the human side of these change initiatives or organizational changes. And for me, that's the key takeaway. Focus on the human side more than the technology side. I've got another question. What would you say is your most valued tool in your toolkit when it comes to implementing or kind of embarking on an organizational size change?
I would say, for me personally, I think being relatable is the most important thing, because I would normally play a role where I'm maybe orchestrating multiple teams. However, it's very easy to be seen as the person who hasn't got a clue what's happening on the ground or day to day. So being relatable, and that can span into multiple different things. It could be being seen to be doing things that you would otherwise shouldn't have to do, so that your team can see that you're in it with them and people can see that you're in it with them. Being open and transparent about how the change will make you feel, always making you feel. That's another way to be relatable. And then also being able to tell a story and tell it with impact and emotion, something that actually doesn't come natural to me, but I think everybody has to find a way to put their emotion into the change that they're doing with people, so that people can believe that you're passionate about what you're doing and that you have brought into it yourself. And when you have brought it into it yourself and people can see that, they're more likely to buy into it too. So I say, of all the skills that I may or may not have, that's one that I think is one that I apply the most and make a big deal out of, so that I can get people to work with me and not against me.
I have another question. How often do you think organizations go through change?
So how often do they? It happens in it happens in phases, waves. The first wave is when there's new leadership involved, right? That always invokes change, because somebody has to make their mark. New leadership is involved or arrives for a reason, and it's usually to make some changes. So that's one. And then when there are market conditions that require it. And then you also have to think about organization from the top or departmental, because I think it can be both ways. So those, I think, are the areas where people make changes most frequently. What I think should happen is That's what I just said. In addition to offensive and defensive, or shall we say proactive, that's the word I really need to use, proactive change. And that proactive change is not just looking at the market to say something's happening, we need to respond. That's probably be more defensive. I think people should be more offensive. And what that means is, what does the 10-year outlook look like? Where's the market going? And let's get ahead of that market so we become the leaders in that market. I don't think there's enough of that certainly in business and maybe in other organizations as well, to become a market leader by thinking ahead. And even to the point where you are creating a market that doesn't exist or may not ever exist anytime soon unless you did something about it. And I think those, if you look at it from a business perspective, that's where the biggest opportunities lie for a firm or an organization to capitalize and to grow and to be successful, to create markets where they don't exist, where nobody's really looking. And then with that, I think people say, oh, you've got to skate to where the puck is going. This is, I guess, a ice hockey or skating analogy. I agree with that, because you need to think ahead. But I also think that the true superstars in life are those who don't just do that, don't just skate where the puck is going, but also create a new puck.
You've made me reminded me, sorry, of a story about Nokia, actually, which was back in the day one of the largest mobile phone manufacturers. I think it had 85, maybe 90% of the market share. And then this thing came out called the iPhone, which was just a screen, and you were like, "What's that all about?" Oh, it's not. We don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about that. And then iPhone got launched, and within a couple of years, Nokia was no more, and that was because it wasn't, like, to your point, looking further ahead at external influences on their on their business, and how the tides are likely to change, and to kind of have a strategy on how to adapt. So yeah, no, it's a really good good answer, and it kind of made me think about that story.
I think what we're both agreeing on is change is constant and is going to continue to be required. This is great conversation, Mike. I'm going to give you an opportunity to say, what would you advise anyone who wants to get into working in more, I guess, strategic, larger changes that impact as many people internally and externally as possible? What would you give them as a tip?
I've a few, and I'll the first one is, it's good to get certifications in certain disciplines, practices, methods, but the true benefit is the application and experimentation of using them, hands-on experience in kind of managing complex projects or change, multiple stakeholders, getting those battle scars. And I think that you learn so much from gaining battle scars. And then I think start thinking slightly differently, think in terms of strategic thinking. And what I mean by this is kind of shifting your minds from tactical execution of doing the change, but more the strategic orchestration of change. So understanding how, if you're part of a change program, how do all the projects roll up to the broader business change outcome, and how does your work stream, if you're looking after one work stream, value contribute to the overarching value? So yeah, it's getting start thinking in those terms, the kind of orchestration of projects, the business change, and looking at the kind of the business side, which is kind of the business acumen, I guess, is the next really useful tip. Think about, to be able to become emotionally attached to the outcome and the change, you need to build up some kind of business acumen. What are understand the industry you're in, the changes being applied to, the commercial drivers, the business model, and really start thinking about think broader, just like if you're in technology, for example, what broad implications are there? So from marketing, finances, business, different types of business operations. So you start thinking about the overarching change across the whole business, and then you start seeing the kind of the dots and the connections between what you're doing and what other areas of the program are doing.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike.
And the final one. Sorry, I just we've talked about it throughout the whole lot. I think. I think I need to give us the special mention, which is the human side of change. Sorry, I just
exactly right
there because we did talk about it. Yeah.
Totally agree. Great, Mike. I don't know where the time's gone. It's time's upon us already. So I think all I have to say now is just thanks so much for your time. It's been great catching up with you. And all the best. I'll speak to you again soon, next time. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.